They said it was too complicated, too fragile, too unconventional to survive the brutal realities of the Pacific War. And yet, this, over-engineered, torpedo bomber would go on to become the deadliest aircraft in the U.S. Navy's arsenal, responsible for sinking more enemy ships than any other American plane in history. This is the story of the Grumman TBF Avenger, the so-called mechanic's nightmare, that defied its critics, rewrote the rulebook on naval aviation, and achieved something no one expected: the highest kill ratio of any U.S. plane in World War II. To understand why the Avenger mattered so much, we have to go back to 1941, when the United States was on the brink of war. The Navy's primary torpedo bomber at the time, the Douglas TBD Devastator, was anything but devastating. It was slow, and completely outclassed by Japanese Zero fighters. The Navy needed a replacement, a rugged, fast, and modern torpedo bomber that could actually survive in combat. Enter Leroy Grumman, a soft-spoken engineer and former naval aviator with a knack for solving problems others couldn't. His company, Grumman Aircraft Engineering, had already built tough, dependable fighters like the F-4F Wildcat. But this new project was different. The Navy wanted a torpedo bomber that could carry a full payload, fly long distances, and still operate from an aircraft carrier deck barely 800 feet long. It was in many ways an impossible ask, but Grumman wasn't known for giving up. He designed an aircraft so robust that mechanics would later joke it was built like a truck. Yet it wasn't just strong, it was clever. The Avenger featured Grumman's signature wing folding system, a brilliant piece of engineering that allowed its massive wings to tuck neatly beside the fuselage like a bird folding its feathers. This innovation meant the Navy could fit more planes below deck, effectively doubling carrier capacity. Still, not everyone was convinced. Test pilots called it overcomplicated, with too many moving parts that could fail in battle. The hydraulic systems powering the wings, landing gear, and bomb bay doors were advanced for their time, but also potential liabilities. Critics argued the plane was too heavy, too complex, and too ambitious. But while others hesitated, the world was changing fast. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The U.S. was thrust into a war across the vast Pacific, a theater dominated by aircraft carriers. Suddenly, Grumman's overcomplicated design didn't seem so excessive. It seemed essential. By the time the Avenger entered service in 1942, the Navy was desperate. The Battle of Midway was looming, a clash that would decide the balance of power in the Pacific. Yet fate had a cruel twist. The Avengers sent to Midway were so new that only 6 were ready for combat. They launched bravely and almost none came back. 5 were shot down. The lone survivor limped home, riddled with holes, its gunner dead and its pilot wounded. On paper, it was a disaster. The press called it a failure. But for the Navy's engineers, it proved something profound. The Avenger could take punishment that would have shredded any other aircraft. Even in that first doomed mission, the seeds of its legend were planted. After Midway, the Avenger was refined and mass-produced at astonishing speed. Grumman's factory on Long Island worked around the clock, churning out thousands of them. To keep up with wartime demand, General Motors was even brought in to produce the plane under license, building Avengers in automotive plants that had been converted into makeshift aircraft factories. By late 1942, the Avenger was ready for redemption, and it got it at Guadalcanal, where U.S. pilots finally had enough training and experience to use it effectively. The results were staggering. Avengers proved they could take off with a torpedo, fly low and fast across open water, and deliver a killing blow to enemy ships before escaping under heavy fire. Their defensive armament, a rear gun turret, ventral gun and firing 50 calibers, gave them teeth that few bombers could match. And when it came to survivability, the Avenger was in a league of its own. Its self-sealing fuel tanks, armored cockpit, and rugged construction meant pilots could return home with half the tail missing, engines leaking oil, and bullet holes through every surface. Many crews said flying an Avenger felt like sitting inside a steel fortress with wings. But there was another reason the Avenger was so feared: its ability to adapt. Unlike earlier torpedo bombers, which had to attack from predictable, low-altitude runs, the Avenger could also carry depth charges, bombs, and rockets. It became a Swiss Army knife of naval aviation, performing anti-submarine patrols, level bombing, and even reconnaissance. It could be launched from carriers or from land bases, giving it incredible flexibility across the Pacific theater. And behind the controls of these planes were some of the most skilled and daring pilots the Navy ever produced. Men who would go on to change the course of history. One of them was a young pilot named George H.W. Bush, who at just 20 years old became one of the Navy's youngest aviators. During a 1944 mission over the Bonin Islands, Bush's Avenger was hit by flak and caught fire. He still managed to release his bombs on target before bailing out into the sea. He survived, and would later become President of the United States. For every Bush who survived, though, many others didn't. Torpedo runs remained some of the most dangerous missions of the war. But as tactics evolved and Avengers began operating in larger, coordinated formations, their kill ratio soared. By 1944, the Avenger had become the backbone of the Navy's offensive might, credited with sinking more Japanese shipping tonnage than any other aircraft. What had once been dismissed as overcomplicated was now essential to victory. By 1944, the Avenger wasn't just another aircraft on the carrier deck. It was the aircraft that defined the Navy's reach and striking power. Wherever there was a Japanese fleet, Avengers were not far behind. The Pacific War had entered a new phase. Battles like the Philippine Sea and Late Gulf would test the limits of naval air power on a scale the world had never seen. The Japanese Navy still had powerful ships and experienced pilots, but the tide was turning fast. The United States now had overwhelming industrial strength, carrier supremacy, and a weapon of surgical precision, the Avenger. To understand just how devastating this plane became, let's look at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, often called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Japanese launched more than 400 aircraft in one desperate attempt to destroy the American fleet, but American radar, fighter cover, and coordination turned the battle into a slaughter. The Avenger's role here was not glamorous. It was patient, methodical, and brutally efficient. While Hellcats swept the skies, Avengers hunted what lay below, using improved Mark 13 torpedoes, which had finally been refined after years of disastrous early failures. Avenger crews struck Japanese ships with devastating accuracy. Once the torpedoes actually worked, the results were catastrophic for Japan. Aircraft carriers, cruisers, and destroyers that had survived previous engagements now found themselves helpless under the precision of Avenger strikes. One pilot recalled how, after dropping his torpedo and pulling up, he saw a wall of water and flame rise hundreds of feet in the air as the Japanese carrier Hai detonated beneath him. "It was like watching a mountain explode," he said. The Avenger's versatility also made it a key player in one of the largest naval battles in history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Spread across 4 distinct engagements, Leyte Gulf marked the final destruction of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Avengers from multiple carriers coordinated massive attacks on Japanese surface fleets, sinking battleships, carriers, and cruisers alike. In just one engagement, Avengers helped destroy the super battleship Musashi, one of the largest warships ever built. Wave after wave of aircraft, many of them Avengers, pounded the Musashi with torpedoes and bombs. Despite her monstrous armor, she couldn't withstand the relentless punishment. Eventually, the great ship rolled over and sank beneath the waves, a testament to the effectiveness of American naval aviation, and to the aircraft that carried out so much of the destruction. By this point, the Avenger had evolved beyond its original mission. It was no longer just a torpedo bomber, it was an all-purpose strike platform. Avengers hunted submarines, scouted for fleets, bombed shore installations, and even performed night attacks using radar. And this was another of Grumman's quiet innovations. The Avenger had the internal volume and electrical capacity to accommodate cutting-edge radar systems. This made it a key part of the Navy's growing technological advantage. While Japanese pilots still relied on visual detection, American crews could now locate ships and submarines in darkness or fog, long before they could be seen. In the later stages of the war, Avengers were refitted as anti-submarine warfare aircraft patrolling vast areas of the Pacific and Atlantic. They carried depth charges, sonobuoys, and magnetic anomaly detectors. For every submarine that managed to strike an Allied convoy, Avengers were out there hunting a dozen more. It's here that the Avengers' reputation as an unsung hero truly took hold. Fighter aces got the glory, dive bombers got the headlines, but it was the Avenger, quietly and relentlessly, that sank more enemy shipping than any other U.S. aircraft. Even as the war neared its end, the Avenger kept adapting. When Japan's defensive perimeter collapsed and the Allies began bombing the home islands, Avengers flew long-range missions from forward bases like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. They destroyed supply convoys, troop transports, and coastal fortifications with precision that no other bomber in the Navy could match. The plane's durability also became legendary. Crews returned with entire sections of the fuselage missing, hydraulic systems shot out, and engines barely clinging to life. One Avenger famously returned from a mission with over 350 bullet holes and a missing tail gunner, yet it still landed safely on its carrier. That ruggedness wasn't an accident. Grumman engineers had obsessed over redundancy. The hydraulic system, for example, could still operate even if major lines were damaged. The landing gear was so strong that pilots could crash land on a deck and still walk away. And because the Avenger's massive bomb bay doors were hydraulically operated, it could close them instantly after dropping a torpedo, reducing drag and giving it a precious speed advantage on the way out. But perhaps the Avenger's greatest weapon wasn't mechanical at all, it was psychological. By 1945, Japanese sailors knew what an approaching Avenger meant. Death was coming from the sky. Its distinctive engine roar became a sound of dread. They could fire everything they had at it, and still the Avengers kept coming. Even the feared kamikaze pilots couldn't fully neutralize its impact. During the Okinawa campaign, Avengers flew thousands of sorties, providing air cover and launching counterattacks against kamikaze bases. Their endurance, combined with radar-guided bombing, allowed them to strike targets deep behind enemy lines and then return to carriers hours away. By the end of the war, the Avenger had achieved a kill ratio that no other U.S. aircraft could match. It had sunk over 30 Japanese warships and damaged or destroyed hundreds more. In total, Avengers accounted for more than 60% of all torpedo hits scored by U.S. aircraft during the entire conflict. And yet, even as it racked up victories, the Avenger's legacy was strangely understated. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have the sleek lines of a Mustang or the iconic silhouette of a Corsair. It was big, heavy, and unglamorous. A workhorse more than a showpiece. But that's exactly what made it legendary among those who flew it. Pilots called it the plane that brought you home. As the war ended and peace returned, thousands of Avengers sat idle on carrier decks and airfields across the Pacific. Some were scrapped, others were sold off to civilian operators, but a select few found new lives, patrolling oceans, fighting fires, and even searching for lost aircraft. One Avenger, flying decades after the war, would become infamous for another reason: the mystery of Flight 19. In December 1945, a squadron of 5 Avengers took off from Florida on a routine training mission and vanished without a trace. Their disappearance helped spark the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. No wreckage was ever found. Some claimed it was pilot error. Others whispered about magnetic anomalies and supernatural forces. Whatever the truth, it added a strange, almost mythical layer to the Avengers' already storied history. From the skies over Midway to the enigma of Flight 19, the Avengers' story spans courage, innovation, and mystery, a reflection of the human spirit in one of its most intense eras. But there's still one more chapter to this story: the reason why this overcomplicated machine ended up achieving the highest kill ratio of any U.S. aircraft. And to understand that, we need to look beyond numbers and battles, and into the design philosophy that made the Avenger a masterpiece of practical engineering. When people talk about legendary warplanes, they often focus on speed, firepower, or sleek design. But the Grumman TBF Avenger's greatness came from something far deeper: its philosophy of survival. It wasn't designed to win dogfights or break records. It was designed to bring its crew home, mission after mission through hellfire and chaos. And that philosophy, quietly but powerfully, made it one of the most successful killing machines of the Second World War. Leroy Grumman believed that every aircraft should be built around the man flying it. In his mind, reliability was a weapon. He had seen too many pilots die not because of enemy fire, but because of mechanical failure, poor visibility, or lack of protection. So he built the Avenger from the inside out, starting with the pilot, the gunner, and the radioman. The cockpit was armored, the fuel tanks self-sealing, and the layout intuitive. Everything a crewman needed was within reach. Every system had a backup. This approach turned the Avenger into a machine that inspired confidence. Pilots didn't have to worry about whether their plane would hold together. They could focus on the mission. That mindset alone improved performance, and it's one of the reasons the Avenger's combat record was so astonishing. The aircraft's crew coordination also gave it a tactical edge. Each Avenger carried 3 men: a pilot, a turret gunner, and a radioman bombardier. Together they operated as a tight unit. The gunner watched the skies, the radioman handled navigation and communication, and the pilot executed attack runs. In an age when many aircraft relied on a single pilot to do everything, the Avengers' teamwork gave it unmatched situational awareness. During a torpedo run, this coordination could mean the difference between life and death. Pilots would drop to wave-top height, skimming just above the ocean at 150 knots, lining up for a perfect shot. The gunner would scan for enemy fighters, calling out warnings. The radioman tracked altitude and speed, ensuring the torpedo would enter the water at the correct angle. It was a dance performed under fire. One mistake, and the plane would vanish in a column of water and flame. And yet, more often than not, they succeeded. The Avenger's torpedo, the Mark 13, became increasingly lethal as engineers solved its early flaws. By late 1943, the weapon had been redesigned to run deeper and faster, with improved stability and explosive power. The result was devastating. Japanese ships that had once shrugged off attacks from earlier bombers now found themselves split open by precise, low-altitude strikes. At the same time, the Avenger was proving its worth in entirely new roles. In the Atlantic, Avengers hunted German U-boats alongside Royal Navy aircraft. They patrolled the vast, cold waters where convoys were most vulnerable, using radar and sonobuoys to detect submarines. When a contact was made, they would swoop in low, dropping depth charges with eerie precision. These missions were long, grueling, and often lonely, but the results were undeniable. Boats that once roamed freely now found themselves hunted by aircraft that could appear from nowhere and strike without warning. One U-boat commander described the Avengers as wolves of the air. By war's end, the Avenger had sunk or damaged dozens of submarines, hundreds of ships, and provided close air support for countless amphibious landings. Its versatility extended its service life far beyond the war itself. In the post-war years, the Avenger became a cornerstone of Cold War naval aviation. It was refitted with radar domes, magnetic sensors, and sonar equipment. It tracked Soviet submarines, scouted Arctic waters, and served with navies around the world, from Canada and New Zealand to Japan itself, now a U.S. ally. Even civilian agencies saw its value. The U.S. Forest Service converted Avengers into water bombers, using their huge bomb bays to carry and drop thousands of gallons of fire retardant. What had once been a weapon of war now saved lives on the home front. But despite its long and varied career, the Avengers' public reputation remained oddly subdued. It didn't have a signature battle like the B-17's raids over Europe or the Corsairs' dogfights over the Pacific. It didn't star in Hollywood films or adorn comic book covers. Instead, it became something quieter, an engineer's aircraft, a pilot's aircraft, and above all, a survivor's aircraft. Its pilots, decades later, would recall the same theme. It just kept flying. One veteran, recalling a torpedo run against a Japanese cruiser, described how his plane was hit almost immediately. The engine lost oil pressure, the hydraulics were gone, and the controls were sluggish. Any other plane, he said, would have gone straight into the sea. But his Avenger kept going, long enough to drop its torpedo and make it halfway back to the carrier before finally ditching. He and his crew were rescued hours later. I never doubted that plane for a second, he said. Stories like that became the Avengers' unofficial epitaph. It was the machine that wouldn't quit, the workhorse that outlasted its critics and outperformed its reputation. When historians later compiled combat data, the results were staggering. The Avenger had achieved the highest kill ratio of any U.S. aircraft in World War II, destroying or disabling more enemy ships than any other type, and doing so at an extraordinarily low loss rate. Despite flying some of the most dangerous missions imaginable, Avengers had one of the best survival records in the fleet. And this was no accident of statistics. It was the product of a mindset, a design culture built on resilience, redundancy, and practicality. In Grumman's world, simplicity wasn't about having fewer parts. It was about ensuring those parts worked no matter what. In that sense, the Avengers' so-called overcomplication was actually its genius. Every hydraulic line, every gear, every armored plate existed because it increased the crew's chance of coming home. What critics saw as unnecessary weight was, in reality, insurance against death. That philosophy lived on in every Grumman aircraft that followed. The Hellcat, the Panther, and eventually the Tomcat. Each carried the DNA of the Avenger: reliability first, performance second. When you see an F-14 Tomcat folding its wings on a carrier deck, you're looking at a direct descendant of the Avenger's stow wing system. When you hear the roar of a modern Navy strike jet lifting off from a ship, you're hearing the echo of a design philosophy born in a cramped Long Island workshop 8 decades ago. The Avenger's story, then, isn't just about a machine. It's about what happens when human ingenuity meets necessity. It's about a designer who refused to compromise, a nation that refused to lose, and a crew that refused to die quietly in the sky. Even now, a few surviving Avengers still fly, restored by enthusiasts who understand what they represent. When those engines start up, the deep, rumbling growl of a Wright RT-600 twin cyclone, it's more than nostalgia. It's a reminder of an age when engineering wasn't about beauty or simplicity, it was about survival. Every dent in their fuselage, every patch of faded paint, carries a story of courage and endurance. These planes once flew through anti-aircraft fire, into hurricanes of steel, across oceans thousands of miles wide, and came back. For all its complexity, the Avenger was never about perfection, it was about persistence. It embodied the idea that success isn't born from elegance. It's forged through resilience, sacrifice, and an unbreakable will to adapt. And that's why, in the end, the overcomplicated torpedo bomber became the most lethal, most reliable, and most legendary naval aircraft of its generation. It wasn't sleek, it wasn't fast, but it was unstoppable. The Grumman TBF Avenger, a machine built not to impress but to endure, proved that complexity, when done right, is not a flaw, it's the foundation of survival.